It was meant to be just another quiet morning at the airport, until something unbelievable happened. Everything stopped. 14 K-9 units, trained and disciplined, suddenly broke formation, surrounding a boy standing alone near Gate 12. Small, pale. One arm was wooden, carved and worn smooth, the other clutching a tattered teddy bear like it was life itself. No one breathed as the dogs surrounded him, bodies tense, eyes fixed. "Please, call them off!" he shouted, looking around desperately. But they wouldn't move. Not one of them. Then came the barking, sharp, deliberate, echoing through the terminal. The veteran standing nearby froze, not out of fear, but because he was experienced enough to recognize the silence before chaos. Beside him, his old war dog Max had gone still, gaze locked on the bear. Something was wrong, not with the child, but with what he was holding. Within moments, the calm morning turned into chaos. Alarms blaring, passengers screaming, and a single boy standing at the center of a storm no one could explain. Was he in danger? Or were the dogs trying to save him from something none of us could see? What happened next would test the meaning of instinct, loyalty, and the bond between a soldier and the dog who never stopped protecting. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Because this is one story you'll never forget. The morning unfurled like silk across the skyline, a quiet shimmer of gold brushing over the glass towers, the distant hum of engines blending with the pulse of a city that never truly slept. At the airport, sunlight poured through the vast windows. The smell of roasted coffee, faint perfume, and worn leather mingled in the air, a scent of departures and reunions, of beginnings and goodbyes. It was one of those mornings that made people believe life was predictable, steady, and ordinary. Among that sea of movement walked Raymond Cole, a man built of discipline and memory. His steps were measured, cane tapping against the floor with the patience of someone who'd learned to move through pain without showing it. The years had weathered his face, fine lines carved by war, loss, and the quiet ache of surviving too long. His jacket, military brown and faded at the elbows, carried the faint scent of rain and gun oil, though he hadn't worn a uniform in years. Beside him padded Max, his K-9 partner, a German shepherd with a sable black coat and eyes the color of dusk, loyal, alert, and silent in that way only soldiers and dogs can be. They weren't here for duty. No command, no mission, no battlefield. Just a veteran and his dog returning home after a medical evaluation, lost among civilians who didn't know what courage looked like when it limped. Raymond adjusted the strap of his worn canvas bag and scanned the terminal with a soldier's instinctive caution, the kind that never dies, even when the war does. He caught fragments of small lives unfolding, a mother struggling with a stroller, a young man asleep against his suitcase, a flight attendant fixing her lipstick in the reflection of her phone. It was all so human, so fragile, that for a fleeting moment, Raymond felt something close to peace. Then Max stopped. It was abrupt, the kind of stop that tightens every nerve in a man who's learned to trust silence more than words. The shepherd's ears flicked, his nostrils flared, and his head turned sharply toward the far end of the terminal, toward Gate 12. The air between them changed, denser, heavier, as if the world itself had taken a breath and forgotten how to exhale. Raymond's hand tightened around the leash. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, though his gut already knew the answer. There was something or someone out of place. He followed Max's gaze through the crowd, and that was when he saw him. The boy stood by the glass wall, half hidden by the morning light spilling through it. Small, no more than 8 years old, with skin as pale as unmarked paper and hair the color of dry wheat under the sun. He wore a thin gray sweater too large for his frame and jeans torn at the knees. But it wasn't his frailty that caught Raymond's attention. It was the stillness. Children don't stand that still. One of the boy's arms ended in a wooden prosthetic, simple, hand-carved, sanded smooth by time and touch. The other hand clutched a tattered teddy bear, pressed so tightly against his chest that the fabric around its seams strained. His eyes, pale blue and wide, stared straight ahead, unfocused, as though he were watching something far away, something only he could see. No one seemed to notice him. Travelers brushed past without a glance, wheeling suitcases, checking phones, chasing time. The boy was an island in the stream, still, silent, invisible. Raymond's chest tightened. There was something unnatural in the quiet around that child. He felt it the way old soldiers feel the shift in wind before artillery. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. Max's body began to tremble. A low growl rolled from his chest, deep and deliberate, not of anger, but of recognition. Raymond had heard that sound before, once, when a landmine had been hidden beneath the sand where no human eye could see. He took a slow step forward. The boy didn't move. His small shoulders rose and fell with shallow breaths, the teddy bear locked in his grip like a lifeline. Raymond opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound that broke the morning wasn't his voice. It was Max's bark. One sharp, thunderous bark that snapped through the air like a shot. Heads turned instantly. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. And then, as if commanded by some unseen force, 14 police dogs on patrol nearby turned as one. Their handlers shouted, startled, but the dogs no longer listened. Like a wave of muscle and instinct, they began to move, paws hitting tile in perfect synchronization. Their eyes locked on the same small figure by the glass. The sound of their steps was rhythmic, echoing through the terminal, and for a heartbeat, no one breathed. "Hey, hold formation!" someone yelled, but it was too late. The dogs had already broken rank. Passengers backed away, murmuring confusion. Phones rose into the air, cameras recording what no one could explain. And there, at the center of it all, stood the boy. Frozen, clutching his bear, eyes wide as the circle of dogs closed in, their heads lowered, tails straight, not in aggression, but in something far stranger, unity, purpose. Max pulled against the leash, his fur bristling. Raymond steadied him, but inside his instincts roared awake. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. The boy wasn't the threat. He was the reason. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. An old woman whispered a prayer. A businessman muttered about security. Somewhere, a child began to cry. The hum of the airport, the laughter, the chatter, the calls for boarding, all fell away until there was only one sound left. The synchronized growl of 14 trained K9s. Raymond's heart beat slowly and heavily in his chest. He felt the weight of a story beginning, one he hadn't asked to witness, but now couldn't walk away from. He could see it in Max's eyes, that same unspoken vow that had carried them through war. Stay alive, stay aware, trust the silence. And as sunlight shimmered over the polished floor, reflecting off the mirrored glass, Raymond Cole realized that this morning, this ordinary, golden, peaceful morning, had just fractured into something else entirely. The dogs began to circle the boy, bodies low, breaths measured, not in hostility, but in a strange, perfect synchrony that froze the entire terminal. The silence after the bark felt unnatural, thick, heavy, almost sacred. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Travelers stopped mid-step, coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Every sound of the terminal, the wheels, the chatter, the boarding calls, vanished into stillness. In the center of it all stood the boy, small and pale, clutching a worn teddy bear to his chest. Around him, 14 German shepherds formed a perfect circle, heads lowered, tails stiff, muscles trembling like strings drawn to breaking. Raymond raised his hand. "Easy, Max," he said softly, but the command felt useless. Max stood motionless, his body coiled, eyes fixed on the bear. The growl in his throat deepened, a low rumble that carried through the marble floor like distant thunder. Raymond's heart slowed. He had seen this stance before, once in a desert, when Max had sensed a sniper's scope before the shot. This wasn't defiance. It was defense. Security officers rushed forward. "Handlers, pull them back!" one shouted. But none of the dogs moved. Even their handlers froze, leashes taut but powerless. The officers' radios crackled with confusion, fragments of static and unanswered calls. No one dared step into that circle. There was something reverent, almost holy, about the way those animals stood, as if guided by something greater than human command. The boy didn't cry. He just stared down at his bear, lips moving faintly. No one could hear the words, but his small shoulders trembled with each breath. His wooden hand, rough, splintered, gripped the toy until the paint flaked off in his palm. The bear's missing eye caught the sunlight, glinting faintly like glass and metal. Raymond noticed, but said nothing. Instinct told him not to. He looked at Max again. The shepherd's fur bristled, ears flicking toward the boy. Then, as if on cue, the other dogs mirrored him, 14 bodies tightening their circle. Their synchronization was eerie, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Passengers slowly backed away, drawn between fear and awe. Someone whispered, "Are they protecting him?" Raymond took a slow step forward, his cane tapping lightly on the tiles. The sound echoed like a countdown. "Steady, Max," he murmured again, though his voice carried more prayer than command. His years of service had taught him to read silence, and this silence was the kind that came before a revelation. The tall security officer hesitated at the edge. "Sir, we need to secure the child." Raymond shook his head once, his eyes never leaving Max. "Not yet," he said. "They know something we don't." The officer frowned but stepped back. No one argued. Even the handlers seemed to understand that this moment wasn't theirs to control. The sunlight shifted, spilling across the floor in long golden streaks. Dust danced in the air like fine ash. The dogs' shadows stretched across the tiles, 14 dark forms shielding one fragile soul. Raymond could feel his pulse echoing the rhythm of their breathing. Beneath the tension, there was something achingly human. Loyalty, fear, love, all blending into one silent act of protection. The boy finally lifted his head. His eyes, pale blue, rimmed with tears, met Raymond's for the first time. There was no malice there, only confusion, exhaustion, and a strange, wordless plea. Raymond saw the same look he'd seen on young soldiers, the look of someone too small to carry what the world had put on his shoulders. Then Max moved. He stepped closer, nose twitching, muscles taut. The circle followed, closing in just enough to touch the edge of the boy's shadow. A murmur swept through the crowd. Raymond didn't blink. He knew this was the moment, the instinct before discovery. Max's paws made no sound as he crossed the last few feet. He stopped directly before the boy, the two facing each other in perfect stillness. Innocence and instinct locked in a silent understanding. The child didn't flinch. He only whispered something to the bear, pressing it tighter to his chest. Max leaned forward slowly, lowering his head until his nose brushed against the toy's worn fur. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the growl came, deep, raw, and ancient. It started in Max's chest and rolled outward, a sound that didn't just fill the room but seemed to rise from the ground itself. The kind of sound that makes every living thing hold still. It wasn't aggression. It was a warning. Pure, primal, undeniable. The other dogs answered him with a low, unified growl, their bodies tensing in unison. The air itself vibrated. Even the light seemed to tremble. The boy gasped softly, clutching the bear tighter as if to protect it, or hide it. Raymond felt his throat tighten. He'd heard many kinds of fear in his life, human and otherwise. But this wasn't fear. It was recognition. Whatever Max had sensed, it was real, and it was close. For one long second, the whole terminal existed in that fragile balance between revelation and ruin, between calm and chaos. The dogs held their line, breathing as one, guardians of something the rest of the world hadn't yet seen. And when Max's growl deepened again, echoing against the glass walls, Raymond understood. Whatever the danger was, it wasn't coming toward them. It was already here, held in the trembling arms of a frightened boy and his old stuffed bear. The tension in the terminal thickened until even the air felt heavy. Raymond moved closer, lowering himself to one knee. His voice came steady, deep, the tone of a man who had learned to speak calm in chaos. "It's all right, son. You're safe." The boy didn't respond. He stood frozen, his pale face tilted up, blue eyes wide and glassy. His wooden arm hung stiff at his side while the other held tight to the torn teddy bear. Behind them, 14 dogs waited, motionless, as if held by the same invisible command. Max stepped forward, ears raised, nose twitching. His breath came in sharp bursts, each one shorter than the last. Raymond's eyes followed his partner's every move. Something in Max's body language told him this wasn't confusion or fear. It was focused. He reached his hand out slowly. "Can I see it?" The boy hesitated, trembling. Then, with a tiny motion, he loosened his grip and let Raymond take the bear. It was heavier than it should have been, far too heavy for fabric and cotton. The texture under his fingertips was cold, almost metallic. Raymond turned the toy gently. Beneath the worn stitching, he felt a faint vibration. It was subtle but steady, like a tiny heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. His breath slowed. He had felt something like this before, long ago overseas, when he had searched roadside dust for hidden devices. He knew the difference between innocence and danger disguised as one. "Officer," Raymond called quietly, "bring me a scanner." A young security guard rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside him. The device hummed softly as it passed over the toy. Then, a sharp, shrill beep. The sound cut through the stillness. The officer's face paled. Raymond saw the screen flash red, metallic core detected. The people nearest stepped back. Someone whispered, "Is that a bomb?" But no one answered. Raymond looked at the boy again, small, trembling, his lips moving soundlessly. He said Daddy wanted it fixed. the child whispered. Raymond's brow furrowed. Who said that? The boy's gaze wandered, voice barely audible. The man in the car. He said Daddy needed it fixed before he could come home. Every instinct in Raymond's body went cold. The details were all too familiar. The setup, the false message, the innocence used as camouflage. His hand tightened around the toy. You're telling me someone gave you this? He asked gently. The boy nodded, a single shaky motion. Max gave a low growl, steady and certain. It wasn't fear, it was confirmation. The security officer reached for his radio. We've got a possible... But before he could finish, a scream ripped through the air. Samuel! The sound tore across the terminal, sharp and desperate. Everyone turned as a woman pushed past the guards, stumbling through the line of police dogs before anyone could stop her. She ran straight toward the boy, tears streaking her face. Samuel, she cried again, her voice cracking. She fell to her knees beside him, arms wrapping tight around his shoulders. She looked around wildly, her hair disheveled, her clothes rumpled, a gray coat, boots half unlaced, face pale with terror. Oh God, she gasped, holding him so tightly that he could hardly breathe. They took him from me. Raymond steadied himself. Ma'am, who took who? Her words came out between sobs, uneven and terrified. 2 men, outside, said they were from the airline, that they needed to check something. They told me to wait. Then they drove away. She looked at the boy, then the bear lying on the floor. He said Daddy wanted it fixed, she whispered. They told me the same thing. The officer froze, radio still in his hand. Raymond exchanged a look with him, the kind that didn't need words. He knew now. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. The boy clung to his mother, confused, scared, still whispering. He said Daddy wanted it fixed. The woman wept harder. I thought they were helping him. I didn't know. The scanner in the officer's hand beeped again, longer, sharper this time. Max barked, a single sound that made everyone flinch. Raymond turned toward the noise, heart pounding. The bear was still on the ground, its fabric trembling as if something inside was humming to life. The mother's eyes widened. What's happening? She whispered. Raymond didn't answer. He gestured for everyone to move back. Clear the area, he ordered, voice low but firm. The guards hesitated, unsure. Now. The boy began to cry softly. Please don't take it. Daddy said... Raymond looked at him, at the way his small hands trembled against his mother's coat. Your daddy didn't send this, he said quietly. Someone used his name. The woman covered her mouth, shaking her head as the truth began to sink in. They used my son. Her voice cracked, disbelief turning into guilt. Raymond kept his gaze on the bear. Max, he whispered. The dog stood beside him, muscles tight, eyes locked on the toy. Raymond had seen that look before, the instant before danger revealed itself. A faint sound began to rise from inside the bear. It wasn't ticking, not mechanical, more like a low pulse, a vibration growing stronger. The officer holding the scanner stepped back. It's active, he said under his breath. Before anyone could move, the device beeped again, one long, piercing tone that silenced everything. The mother's voice came last, trembling, barely holding itself together. They took him from me, 10 minutes ago. And in that single breath, the truth became clear. Not a toy, not a coincidence, but a message left in the hands of a child who never should have been part of it. The mother's voice faltered, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. They took him, she whispered again, clutching the boy as if the words themselves might vanish. Raymond helped her to her feet. "Ma'am, what's your name?" She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, eyes red and trembling. "Claire," she said quietly. "Claire Danvers." Her voice cracked when she added, "My husband. He worked for the Department of Defense. He disappeared 3 months ago. They said it was an accident, but—" Her voice trailed off, the fear behind it older than grief. Raymond's expression hardened. He'd heard that name before. Danvers, from a military brief years back. A systems engineer specializing in encryption. The kind of man whose work lived behind locked clearance doors. Claire continued, her words tumbling out faster now, as if saying them was the only way to stay sane. After he vanished, strange things started happening. Unmarked cars outside, calls that hung up when I answered. And then Samuel got sick, and I thought maybe we were safe. I stopped running. I was wrong. Her voice broke. She looked down at the boy's wooden arm and brushed her fingers gently across the grain, as if grounding herself. "They said they'd help me find him if I handed something over," she whispered. "But I never had it, until that bear showed up." Raymond's gaze flicked toward the toy still resting on the tile. The red light from the scanner pulsed faintly, like a warning heartbeat. He crouched beside it again, his shadow long and solid across the floor. "This wasn't built to explode," he murmured. "Too clean, too cold." He pressed 2 fingers to the fabric. The faint hum responded, rhythmic and constant. Then he felt it, a micro-resonance, the kind used in tracking transceivers. His chest tightened. "They weren't trying to destroy anyone," he said under his breath. "They were tracking." Max's head jerked up before anyone else reacted. His ears twitched, body tensing as his gaze shot toward the wide glass window facing the tarmac. The faint hum of an engine rolled through the air, distant but steady. Raymond turned just as Max growled, low and guttural, the kind of warning that lived in the bones of war dogs. Outside the fence, through the glare of sunlight, a white van idled. No markings, no movement. Just the faint shimmer of exhaust curling into the cold air. Raymond's pulse quickened. "Everyone back from the window," he ordered. His voice cut through the confusion, calm but commanding. The officers moved to comply, forming a protective half-circle around the civilians. He motioned to one of them. "Seal the exits and check every service entry." Claire clutched her son tighter. "What is this?" she asked, voice trembling. "What do they want from us?" Raymond's eyes narrowed. "Information," he said quietly. "Your husband worked in encrypted systems. If they couldn't find him, they'd use the closest link, you. And when that didn't work, they used your boy." Claire shook her head in disbelief. "No, they wouldn't." "They already did," Raymond interrupted softly. His tone wasn't cruel, only certain. He'd seen this kind of manipulation before. Innocent hands turned into delivery mechanisms. Max barked once, sharp, deliberate. The sound cut through the noise like a blade. His stance shifted toward the glass, nostrils flaring. Raymond caught it. That sudden change in posture that meant he smelled something wrong. A faint chemical tang reached his nose a second later. Acrid, artificial. His stomach dropped. "Explosives," he muttered. Red emergency lights flashed across the ceiling as an officer hit the alarm. Voices shouted through radios, commands echoing through the terminal. "Seal Gate 12!" someone yelled. The glass doors slid shut with a mechanical hiss. But Max wasn't looking outside anymore. His head turned sharply toward the far corner, a maintenance zone near the edge of the terminal, half hidden behind luggage carts and cleaning equipment. His growl deepened. Raymond followed his gaze. A single duffel bag sat near the glass wall, out of place among the polished tiles and yellow caution cones. It was a dark green military issue, too familiar to ignore. He took a slow breath. "They used the boy as bait," he whispered. Claire's eyes widened, her lips parting in realization. "Bait for what?" Raymond's voice dropped to a rasp. "For whatever they left behind." Max lunged forward suddenly, teeth bared, pulling the leash taut. Raymond barely managed to follow as the dog charged toward the bag. "Max, wait!" he called, but Max didn't stop. The K9 moved like a shadow, trained, precise, purposeful. The nearest officer rushed up with the scanner still in hand. He swept it toward the bag, and the device emitted a rapid, escalating series of beeps. The sound spiked into a continuous scream, red lights flashing across the small display. Raymond froze. His mind raced through possibilities. Pressure trigger, chemical fuse, or worse, a decoy masking something deeper. His chest tightened, the weight of decision pressing down like old memory. Claire grabbed her son, backing away, eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" she cried. Raymond didn't answer. His focus stayed locked on Max, who now stood inches from the bag, nose pressed against the zipper, body rigid but unflinching. The low rumble in his chest sounded almost human, a mix of defiance and warning. Every movement in the terminal stopped. Even the alarms seemed distant now, drowned beneath the single rising tone of the scanner. Raymond's hand clenched around his cane. His voice came barely above a whisper. "Easy, boy." But it was already too late. Max lunged. His weight hit the ground beside the bag, claws, scraping tile, as the scanner's readings spiked completely off the charts. The sound became unbearable, one long, shrieking note that filled the air like the cry of something breaking loose. And in that instant, Raymond knew. The danger hadn't left. It was already inside. The moment the scanner's tone broke, the terminal erupted into chaos. Red lights flared. Radios screamed with overlapping orders. "Evacuate Gate 12!" someone shouted, their voice cracking under pressure. Passengers scattered, their footsteps echoing like thunder. Yet in the middle of it all, Raymond Cole didn't move. He stood beside Max, one hand on the dog's shoulder, eyes locked on the maintenance bag as the bomb unit closed in. He'd learned long ago that panic killed faster than bullets. His breath stayed even, measured, in through the nose, out through the teeth. Around him, men in blast suits moved with silent coordination, their visors glowing under emergency light. One technician lifted the bag carefully, slid it onto a containment cart, and rolled it away toward the blast tunnel. Max sat motionless, his chest rising in slow rhythm, but his eyes followed the movement until it vanished behind the steel doors. Then his ears twitched, a subtle warning. Outside, from beyond the terminal glass, the low rumble of an engine cut through the din. Raymond turned. A black van, the same one he'd glimpsed minutes earlier, was pulling away from the security fence. Its tires screeched across the wet tarmac, sunlight flashing across its tinted windows. "There!" he barked into his radio. "Unit 12, black van moving north. Perimeter breach confirmed." The sound of sirens tore through the air. Police cruisers spun around the runway, lights blazing. Overhead, a helicopter's rotors began to thunder. The chase had begun. Raymond stepped closer to the window, watching the van swerve between barriers as officers moved in pursuit. His knuckles tightened on his cane. For years, he'd trained himself to recognize patterns in chaos, and this one screamed strategy. "They're trying to draw us out," he muttered. A technician called from behind. "Sir, we've secured the bag. No detonation, just a triggering signal relay." Raymond nodded, not looking back. His focus was fixed on the van as it reached the far end of the tarmac. Then, a sudden flash. A burst of sparks shot skyward. The ground shook beneath his boots. The explosion came from near the service road, not strong enough to destroy, but enough to stall pursuit. Glass trembled in its frames. The radio crackled. "Second device confirmed on runway 2. Repeat, controlled blast, minimal damage." The next few minutes blurred into noise, commands, sirens, the heavy breathing of men running toward danger. Then the word came through: "Suspects in custody." By the time the van was towed back to the perimeter, the sun had dropped low, casting long shadows over the airfield. The smell of fuel and ozone lingered in the air. Officers surrounded the wreckage, weapons drawn, while techs began unloading the contents. Raymond approached, Max trotting quietly beside him, his fur streaked with dust. Inside the van, the evidence told a story clearer than words ever could. Stacks of false passports, several encrypted drives sealed in protective cases, and a folder filled with glossy photos, Claire and Samuel, captured in train stations, border crossings, hospital parking lots. Each image was stamped with different countries, different dates. Raymond's jaw tightened. He picked up one of the photos, fingers brushing the paper. The child in the picture was laughing, his wooden arm just visible. "They were tracking them," he murmured. "Not to find them, to watch them." One of the techs, a short man with square glasses and a calm demeanor, stepped closer, holding a tablet. "Sir, we decoded a signal from the Bear's transmitter. The data stream matches restricted military coordinates, encrypted channels linked to defense research servers." Raymond turned slowly. "You're saying this thing wasn't just a tracker? It was transmitting data from inside?" The man nodded grimly. "Exactly. The Bear wasn't meant to harm anyone. It was meant to spy, to trace whoever handled it. Once the device got close enough to secure systems, it would start sending bursts of coded location data. Someone out there was collecting it in real time." Silence fell over the hangar. Even the hum of engines seemed to fade. Claire stood a few feet away. Samuel pressed to her side, both wrapped in blankets offered by medics. Her eyes were swollen, but steady now. No longer just grief, but clarity. "They used my son," she whispered. "All this time they used him to find my husband's work." Raymond lowered his head. The weight of what she said settled deep. He'd seen cruelty before, but there was something about this, using a child as a vessel for espionage, that hollowed him out. He turned to Max. The dog's eyes met his, steady, alert, still glinting with that unspoken intelligence that had saved them more times than he could count. For a moment, Raymond didn't see an animal. He saw a soldier. "You knew before any of us," he said softly. Max tilted his head slightly, ears flicking as if he understood. Raymond rested a hand on his partner's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the fur, the steady pulse of life, the heartbeat of something loyal beyond logic. He'd once trusted this dog with his life in a war zone, and now, years later, Max had done it again. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about faith. Behind them, the technicians continued their work, bagging evidence, marking coordinates. The sound of radios faded to a low hum. Raymond stood still for a long time, eyes on the small boy clutching his mother's coat. The lesson echoed quietly inside him. The kind of truth that only reveals itself after the dust has settled. Training teaches instinct, but love teaches trust. And sometimes it isn't the orders that save lives. It's the bond between those who still believe. Dawn rose gently over the runway, painting the glass walls in pale gold. The chaos of the night before had vanished, leaving only silence and the low hum of engines in the distance. The air still carried the faint scent of fuel and rain, reminders of what had nearly been. Inside the terminal, the chairs were overturned, coffee cups left half full, and a single child's teddy bear rested on the floor beside a pair of dusty footprints. Claire sat near gate 12, her coat draped around her shoulders. Samuel curled tightly in her arms. His head rested against her chest, eyes half closed, exhaustion and peace tangled in equal measure. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Around them, 14 dogs formed a silent semicircle, guardians no longer on alert, but still standing watch. Their breathing came slow and deep, tails resting on the cold tiles, eyes reflecting the first light of day. It was over. For now. Reporters gathered outside the security barrier, flashes from their cameras flickering against the glass, desperate to capture what they would later call the airport miracle. But Raymond didn't stay to see it. He stood by the wide window overlooking the tarmac, his hand resting gently on Max's head. The old German shepherd leaned against his leg, his coat still streaked with dust and the faint scent of smoke. Together they watched as dawn climbed higher, the clouds parting into slow ribbons of pink and silver. "We've seen enough cameras, haven't we, partner?" Raymond murmured. His voice carried that soft weight only soldiers carried, the tone of men who had seen too much and asked for too little. Max didn't look up. He simply thumped his tail once, a quiet answer that said everything words could not. Behind them, Claire approached, Samuel still half asleep in her arms. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Raymond shook his head gently. "You already have." His eyes drifted toward Max. "He's the one who knew before any of us." Claire knelt, resting her hand on the dog's shoulder. "Then thank you," she said softly, "for giving me my son back." Claire later worked with authorities to complete her husband's unfinished code, the one that had almost cost their lives. Outside, the sun rose higher. The helicopters were gone, the officers dismissed, and the last of the emergency lights flickered off. What remained was peace, fragile, precious, real. Weeks later, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen. The world had already moved on, as it always does. The headlines had faded, but the story lived on those who had seen it, in the way strangers nodded to Raymond on the street, or the way a child would smile at Max as they passed. Inside the children's ward, Samuel sat propped against his pillow, his cheeks still pale but his smile brighter now. A folded paper rested in his lap. Max padded forward, nails clicking softly on the linoleum floor. His ears perked, tail low, movements slow and respectful, as if he understood hospitals were places where silence meant healing. The boy lifted his wooden arm slightly, clumsy but determined, and reached out his other hand to pat Max's muzzle. "Hi, buddy," he said with a shy grin. His fingers brushed the dog's fur, warm, steady, alive. He looked up at Raymond, who stood by the doorway, hat in hand. "I made something for you," the boy said, voice small but steady. He handed over the folded note. Raymond took it carefully, the paper crinkling between his calloused fingers. Inside, in uneven letters written with a trembling hand, were the words, "Tell the dog he's my angel." For a long moment, Raymond didn't move. The sounds of machines and quiet chatter faded away. He looked at Max, who now sat close beside the bed, head tilted, eyes deep and knowing. The veteran swallowed hard. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "You hear that, partner? You've got wings now." Max blinked once, his tail sweeping softly against the floor, as if acknowledging the honor. Claire wiped at her eyes silently from across the room, her hand resting protectively on Samuel's shoulder. Outside the window, morning light spilled across the parking lot, soft, golden, forgiving. The kind of light that washed away everything sharp from the night before. Raymond exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest finally breaking loose. He looked at Max again, the corners of his mouth lifting faintly. "Sometimes duty isn't about orders," he said quietly. "It's about the heart." As they turned to leave, Max glanced back one last time. His gaze found the boy, small, fragile, but smiling, and for a brief second, the air between them felt sacred. The shepherd's eyes softened, his tail lowered in a gentle wave, a soldier's salute in silence. And in that stillness, between dawn and day, between memory and peace, the world felt a little safer. Not because the war was over, but because loyalty still lived in hearts that never stopped believing. It began as an ordinary morning. A veteran, his loyal K9, and a boy holding a worn teddy bear. But what unfolded inside that airport reminded us that courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and heroes don't always carry weapons. Sometimes they simply listen when no one else does. Max felt danger before anyone saw it. Raymond trusted that instinct, and in doing so, saved a mother and child from the shadows that hunted them. What could have ended in tragedy became a story about faith, loyalty, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. When the noise faded and the lights dimmed, only one truth remained: that duty never ends when the heart remembers why it began. So if this story touched you, let it stay with you a little longer. Maybe share it with someone who still believes in quiet acts of courage, the kind that changes everything. And if you'd like to keep walking beside stories like this, about loyalty, healing, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to Healing with Max. Because sometimes the world still needs to be reminded that even silence can save a life.